again.
It's an excursion into the odd and into the very, very different.
Quality, quantity, and variety.
ROCKFLUX.
Let's get this show on the road.
Good morning. Just sit right back and you'll hear a tale.
Thank you, folks. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for coming and visiting me on this 26th day, Saturday, February, and it's 3:43 a.m. Eastern Time. And the title of this show is Living in a World Gone Mad, A Man Out of Time. And this photo I have on the screen isn't the title card from today's show. Rather, it's me about, 25 years ago. I don't look a lot different. It's that weird thing,
The future. He came from the future.
I just keep going back and then coming back as the same guy. But that was one of my favorite times on Earth, or in this time, I should say. You could see I had a microphone. Well, it was an old-fashioned microphone standing up. There's a martini glass, bottle of Tanqueray. I used to do in the same on-air lights there. If you look up top towards the right, and then there's a cathode ray monitor way in the back. There's a keyboard. That was a nice place. I had a nice audio setup there. And video. 27 years. About 27 years ago, maybe that was. Something like that. I don't know. Over 25 years ago, put it that way. But, yeah, that was a good time, Yesterday was like a nightmare, and I watched the show back. I thought it would be shorter and worse than it turned out, and it actually wasn't. We'll just take a break from this for a second. Well, not from that, from this. And we'll look at our title card for the day, which is a sepia of just taking moments before I went on the air. Another time and place for the morning show. So it's kind of keep doing that. Get this right. Another time, another place. Another time, another place. Tony Caravan Live. That was a show I was doing too. Yeah. So for those who are,
You're listening to Tony Caravan Live.
For those who are regular listeners and who are curious about what happened yesterday, the aftermath. I made my coffee lighter today. I ran just water through my coffee maker. And, the coffee is kind of semi, I don't know if you can see. Well, it kind of looks dark on there, but it's a little more translucent. I don't know. Is that the right word? It's cold in here again. The weather's really weird. It's let's see if it changes. The temperature is 21 degrees outside. It's supposed to snow at 4 a.m. or snow flurries or something, but then that's it. And it's supposed to be partly sunny for the next couple days, even though it's going to stay, winter weather, the night's below freezing and the days just above freezing. But there's no rain for 3 days, 24, 48, 72 hours. So what that means is, I guess at some point today, and then Tuesday's supposed to be just cloudy. I'm keeping my fingers crossed. It's supposed to be like 50 degrees then. So, you can't trust the weather. They were way off yesterday and the day before, and it caused me all sorts of, a disaster. Like Woody Allen said in that one movie, it was my worst nightmare realized. When I left here, when I thought I heard a dripping up there above my head, that's the second floor. The attic is the third floor, and the roof technically is like the fourth floor. That's why I've had trouble trying to find someone who's been willing to go up there to patch it. Nobody has a ladder that tall. And so that gets you into a whole different thing. Then you're talking major contractors who go like, well, we don't fix roofs. We just replace them. We'll replace it for $20,000 or something. So Elon Musk, if you're out there, why don't you put one of your roofs on here and use this as a demonstration house? It's a pity you can't get in touch with people like that, like on a normal basis. Like they have to be following you, I think, to direct message you or something like that. I don't know. But otherwise, just probably a million people out there asking for stupid stuff like that. Could you help me out? But I actually think it would be a good show place to show how you can refit an older house, 100-year-old house, with modern technology. But that aside, because that's fantasy. I went up, and it was my worst nightmare realized. It was like, I don't know, multiple times worse than you could imagine. In fact, if I wouldn't have left the show when I did, that one bucket would have overflowed. Not bucket, but I mean, collecting cat litter box. Water was leaking in my second floor hallway, which means that plaster's going to, when that dries up, that's going to want to fall down and crack and fall down. The front bedroom where I used to sleep, but I moved out of because it's the biggest room, one of the biggest rooms, but it was just cold in the winter and hot in the summer, So I'm in the back. That was leaking like the leaks have expanded, which means I'm going to have like plaster falling down in there. And I have a dehumidifier in that room I set up there, but the dehumidifier was not working. I just couldn't get it to work. I don't know why. You know what I mean? It was like my worst nightmare realized. I go upstairs, I do the draining just in time, because it wasn't because of an overflow. I still don't know where half this water's coming from. And I'm in my bedroom and it's leaking in my bedroom, but I have a collection thing there and this tarp over top of my ceiling in case of an emergency, because it's my bedroom and in case water would get through. I didn't want to, get my bedding and my, nightstand and my everything ruined, which luckily I've set up. So I went up there, and underneath the collection bin, it was filled almost to the brim, but not overflowing. The floor underneath that, which I had put in it was like soaking wet. And I was like, wringing out rags into a bucket and putting them back to absorb it. And I did that, and I came down into my bedroom. I have no place else to go. Down here, it was too cold. I wanted to be up there closer to the action. I had to put down all my towels, my face towels, and all that stuff on the floor. Because, the water was just ridiculous. It was a flood. And temporarily it stopped the drip, but then it started dripping again. I went up, the bucket was filled. I had to wring out the rags. I mean, it was just a wild, crazy mess. And people probably should have filmed it. I barely was able to do it, let alone be able to set up a tripod, a camera, and like film it. And, you know, I mean, I was running back and forth from like 5 different locations, you know, opening a window, dumping buckets of water out the window in the middle of, you know, 3, 4 a.m., whatever time it was by then. 4 a.m., 4 something, maybe 5. I think it was still 4-ish. So I sat there and I watched the short video that I did make yesterday. And I just kept going up. And it kept saying it was going to change to snow all day long, but it didn't. It never did. It just kept raining. In fact, at one point, the rain got more intense. And I was up there and I'm just draining, emptying. It was a nightmare. And finally, by the afternoon, it slowed down to a real light drizzle, and I had things under control. And I was completely stressed out and stuff, and it was cold outside. And I wanted to clean off the sidewalk was like kind of it was like kind of iced. It was slippery, and my stairs. So I cleaned that off. And I decided I'd get some exercise because I had been like clogged up internally. And I walked a mile or so to the grocery store and got some healthy foods. On the way back, a friend of mine has a business, and I was trying to help. I originally had set up a register for his register for him, a digital register. You know, so made for dummies because it's so hard to get employees. You know, like so it's push a picture of the, you know, the food item. Here's what it looks like. Just press there. But anyway, they had gotten rid of an item and they wanted to re-put the item. But this was like about 2 years ago when I had set this thing up for him. And so he goes, could you add this item? Because everybody's calling and asking about it, and we got rid of it. And then that was a semi-nightmare, and I don't know if I really solved the problem. We got it back on, but I think it's still kind of messed up. But the thing, you know, and then I ended up walking home. But the thing about, just to finish that, is that this is part of this thing I've mentioned once or twice, is you get pulled in so many different directions to do things. And that, you know, it's being, you know, a master, you know, jack of all trades, master of everything type of thing. And there like comes a time where you go, yeah, you know, I did that, but you know, that was another time and place. And I don't necessarily mean it in the context of today's show, which we'll get into that as well, but partially. It's like, you know, the changes, like the Bowie song. And so you got to put your mind back into a place where you may have, like if you're someone like me, I mean, if you're somebody that I can usually master anything, and I think anyone can. You know, if I were one of those self-help, I wrote 10 books, but they're not really self-help books necessarily. There are some articles and essays in there that I think are, I guess, could conceivably be self-help. You know, help you out, give you some advice. That's what these shows do sometimes. I mean, this in itself is. But I've always had this belief that if one human can do it, another human can do it. I mean, unless that you suffer from some sort of infirmity or, you know, or are mentally challenged in some way, you know, that it's just not you know, But generally speaking, like I say, everything I say is a generalization. Nothing is an absolute, when you're talking about anything really, right? We're in a constant state of flux. That's kind of why this is called a rock flux. This planet, this rock is in a state of flux. And of course, we'll get into that this year as long as I can endeavor to persevere. These various trials that I seem to be being put through, the trials and tribulations. Trials during tribulations or whatever, I don't know. But the thing is, if you focus on a thing, you can usually master a thing and figure a thing out. And if I can do it, you can do it. It's just that some people give up too easily, get frustrated too easily. And I've had those feelings of frustration sometimes when I've been forced in a situation. And it seems, I don't know, more so than most people, I seem to find myself in situations where somehow I'm the guy that people are calling to do the impossible. And most of my whole adult life, pretty much, I've been able to do that. In fact, one could almost say that many of the times when I wasn't self-employed, the jobs, when I had positions in, where I was the big cheese, so to speak, I was usually brought in, the big kahuna. I was usually brought in to solve a problem, turn a place around, turn a business around. And it was a matter of, analytics. It was a matter of basically focusing and figuring it out. And, and other people, and you say, well, why'd the guy before you or girl before you fail? And I don't have an answer to that. Maybe they were distracted. Maybe they didn't focus hard enough, or maybe their minds weren't open, to this idea. Maybe my IQ is very high, and that helps. But I don't necessarily think that's it. I mean, it could be, but I think that's a contributor. But I've seen some people with, some fairly low IQ, just, people who have done some very heroic and fascinating and interesting and, accomplished, things that you wouldn't expect, another person to accomplish. So I don't think that's it. What I'm saying is I think if one of us can do it, we can all do it. And so yesterday I was on that borderline, because when you're under stress, it creates this thing, cortisol. And, cortisol creates gallbladder stones. It's like a contributor to them. So I'm trying to get through this thing. I'm trying to homeopathy medicine cures, as my goal. And, I'm confronted with this all day crazy stress thing. So I go for this walk, hopefully to relieve the stress. And then I end up trying to fix this cash register, which is putting stress on me because it's like I'm having to draw on something that I mastered 2 years ago and then let go. I always have this idea, forget about the Akashic records out there and the ether and all that stuff. Let's talk about the bioelectric brain and memory stored within your cranium, all right? Because there's two different things, There's your soul experience, your consciousness memory, right? The Akashic or, the one record, God consciousness, right? The information that's out there, things we can tap into, the answers. And then there's the stuff we store in our brain, right? As our brain is this supercomputer. It really is. So anyway, so you have to like clear out some memory, or it gets refiled, or it's in some other spot. And so it was still there because things were starting to look somewhat familiar, but he's standing over my shoulder. It's cold in his business. He's in there to fix some ceiling tiles or something. I just happen to walk by to say hi because he's a friend of mine. And then I'm confronted with this situation. And so, I would rather, be relaxed and, and then I just came from a trauma, an all-day trauma, And it was all day because my trauma began at midnight. So for the average and this might have been already, noonish, or something after, So we're talking about a 12 hours. I mean, that's like a person's, people don't, people work 8-hour days, 9-hour days if they're hard workers. But I mean, I was already in 12 hours of trauma, nonstop too, by the way, cleaning that mess up and dealing with it and emptying the buckets and doing this stuff. And then I had to washing everything and, The coffee's a little better.
You're listening to Tony Caravan Live.
But, it's not what I would call flavorful. So I'm kind of drinking it because I heard it has some health benefits. I heard it from a guy. All right, I'm done with the cash register. That's just an example. And I'm confronted with this constantly. I had somebody who wanted me to fix a website for them. A really crazy website. In fact, and it's not you, Tattoo Man. Not that one. That's a different one. This was an artist website that I had created, some masterpiece using some other program by Adobe called Muse that they discontinued. Right? So not only I don't subscribe to their cloud service anymore, but even if I did, the program used to create this website no longer exists, so it would have been impossible to open the website to make changes. And websites today, you've got CSS and JavaScript and all this kind, in other words, it's not the old days you had HTML or HTML5 and you just went into the code. And maybe you had JavaScript or something like that, or even some server-side stuff. But it was pretty clear what was going on. Well, some of these things they created, they have multiple, folders with this, folders with that, folders with this, and it wants to change everything when you put it in. You need the program. In other words, it's designed for the program. Anyway, so they discontinue the program. So in effect, that website is, beyond repair. Unless you were just making a simple spelling change or something. But you could not, add something that was using some effect, or a slideshow or something weird that was set up in using, some widget or something within that program. Which, by the way, Tattoo, a slideshow is a good idea for that plumbing site. But anyway, you get confronted with that, and I'm confronted with this ridiculous roofing thing. So now I'm a roofer and a handyman, repairman, and I'm building up to the gardening season, which is my primary focus. I do these shows. Like I say, I've written the 10 books, the 50 songs. And in the middle of this, I'm trying to figure out some homeopathic remedies. So because there seems to be a plethora of doctors and nutritionists saying that it's possible, but the information, because of the way that YouTube and the internet is structured, they can't come out right and tell you, because that would be, that would be grounds for banning. So you can't find. So it's like, so I'm in this quandary. But that's my number one priority, is staying alive and staying out of the hospital and staying out of having to have another operation. So you can see where my head is at, And then, and then I've got a cat it's getting older, and I've got to like kind of I don't know. I've got to like restructure the way I feed it, what kind of food I feed them, and all that stuff. I'm living on a budget. The world's changing. Things are crazy. There's my leisure time. I want to watch something on YouTube, and it's just full of nonsense. So you're thrown all over the place, and you're just pulled in all kinds of directions. And on top of that, I really feel like I'm a man out of time, And it's like I say, when I think about this picture of me 25 plus years ago, where I more or less look the same. I mean, look, just without the glasses. I'm only wearing these glasses to read the screen. I don't wear them when I walk around. So nothing's really changed, So I've been very successful with my food regimen, in basically reversing the aging process. I mean, it's either that or you'll have to like believe, this.
The future. He came from the future.
That I just keep going back and then coming back as the same guy at the same age. Right? I mean, you decide that. I'm not going to say one thing or the other. Either way, this is got to be a woo-woo show. But at that time, I was also doing graphic design. And you remember, and then I was doing live internet stuff 27 years ago. Like I say, the internet's broken compared to the way it was back in the 90s. It's way better then. Way better. Slower connections, but way better. See, the way we got around it back then was our file sizes. We basically were conscious of our file sizes. So I used to have like web pages where, the headings and the graphics and things like that, the individual pieces on the page were, like 4K and stuff. Now people put up something and it's like 931K. And it's so, of course you need a high speed connection. Right? But the fact of the matter is good old fashioned HTML was very powerful code if you knew what to do with it. And if you add some JavaScript in there, I mean, you could do some amazing things. You just had to be conscious of your design, But today, people don't design web pages. They use WordPress or, most people that's was the popularity of things like Facebook and why a lot of businesses are on Facebook. Because they can just, they're basically just put photo here, put your title here, about you here, put your hours of operation here. You know what I mean? They don't have a blank canvas in which they have to create something. Or they like these sites where they do give you some creativity, it's still templates. So it's a template. And so everybody's got about us, It's like nobody wants it. I used to argue in the 90s against about us pages. Because I used to say all the internet, in fact, I just used this again a couple of days ago talking to somebody. I said the internet is the yellow pages online. The digital is a digital yellow pages. That's really what like Google search is, or any kind of search, the internet in general, right? DuckDuckGo, or however you search if you ask Siri, all right? It's a digital yellow pages, and a website is a brochure, right, in the cloud. Is your, if you're a business, it's a brochure in the cloud. Otherwise, a vlog is a diary, right? And this is a video diary, right? This is my morning vlog, like I say. It's just that I happen to be a little more high tech.
You're listening to Tony Caravan Live.
And so I happen to have a few things like that. Oh, yeah. Yeah, oh, yeah, man. So anyway, I got through that trauma yesterday, which was ridiculous. It was 12 hours of dealing with the leaky roof that was making it down to my second floor. It was crazy. It was insanity. Under normal circumstances, I literally was on the verge, or would have been on the verge of a nervous breakdown. But, so I have to focus this week, which I have to spend one day this week pruning and doing some yard work, because my garden is my primary focus, as I say. And I neglected it towards the end of last year. I'll just leave that other thing there. But as you can see all the growth there, and that's a 2-year-old photo, as I said many times. I say this stuff all the time, but, there's different listeners, different times. Another time, another place. But, everything's changed. So it's hard living in a world that's gone crazy. I did several shows talking about this Ukraine thing, and I'm not going to get into that because, it's just socioeconomic geopolitics, and the world's gone crazy. And there's really crazy things going on in certain countries in Africa and in South America and in Southeast Asia that's not getting any attention whatsoever. There's all sorts of people attacking people and just killing people and taking over portions of places. There's 192, 195 countries on this planet. We say, how many of those can you name, right? So I'm not, just because this is Europe, right, near Europe, they're not a part of the EU or NATO. See, that turned somebody off. Somebody was on, and they left. But you can see how people, deal with that. I get a listener, they come in for a while, and then they get freaked out. They probably wanted to hear something. They probably saw that I had several videos about Ukraine and wanted to hear what my thoughts were. Well, now I'm going to say them. The fact of the matter is, in Chicago this weekend, which we're just, part way into, think about how many people are going to be shot, stabbed, and murdered. And in the aggregate, let's take Philadelphia, New York, Boston, Chicago, LA, Atlanta, Dallas, Miami, you throw in a few more cities, Seattle, whatever, wherever. And how many people? There's somewhere close to 100,000 homicides a year in the U.S. I've said this before, most of which go unsolved. That's just homicides. 100,000 a year. That means in 10 years, approximately 1 million people are killed in the United States, like murdered. And the families get no, closure or anything of the kind because they go unsolved. They're unsolved. So since like 9/11, for example, possibly 2 million people were killed in this country. I mean, that far outweighs, even the loss of troops and, and deaths in war, in those ridiculous, endless wars we got involved in. right here in our own country. But it gets worse than that, and this is more into some of the stuff that I've been talking about lately, and I do want to touch on because of health. There are over 2 million people a year in this country, according to CDC statistics. I'm not just pulling these numbers out of like thin air. Over 2 million people die of things that are either treatable, curable, or you just need not die of due to dietary, problems, food we're eating, consuming. 2 million a year. So that means in 10 years, that's 20 million people. And since 9/11, just using that as a moment in time, right? 2 million a year times 10, 1 decade is 20 million. Times 2 decades is 40 million. Think about that. Right? And you know what those, this isn't like, this is people dying of heart disease, cancer, diabetes, pneumonia, the flu, not this new flu. It doesn't even include that thing. That was just the fly-by-night thing. It's just about over now, I think. Nephrosis, all kinds of weird things. Things caused because of, like I say, dietary. And then there's a lot of suicides. Suicide rate in the U.S. is out of control. People finding life so unbearable in this beautiful country, right, that they just can't cope with it, and they take their own lives. And so you want me to focus on Ukraine, where, sadly enough, there may well be, I don't know, several hundred people may lose their lives, maybe a few more. But I mean, that is, it's a socioeconomic geopolitical problem. It could have been solved by the president of our country, all by contacting Putin and calling him on the phone 2 or 3 months ago, when all this stuff was, when they knew this was going on. This goes back to the Obama administration, and Biden was the point man on Ukraine, if you recall. That was that whole laptop and Hunter Biden getting money with that oil company and stuff. Biden and Ukraine have a connection that goes back a long time. It's like 8 years at least. But all he had to do is call up Putin and say, okay, what the hell's going on? What do you want to do? What's happening here? Let's figure this, figure it out. But he didn't. And yesterday, in the height of this thing, when as Kiev is getting bombed, and I'm not laughing at that, he's nominating someone to the Supreme Court, and making a big deal out of it because it's a person of color, not necessarily because it's a judge. In other words, he's just like, he's already like, he's not even focusing on that. Don't you think the Supreme? I think that could have waited. I mean, So the whole thing's wacky. So that's why I don't want to talk about it, and I'm not going to talk about it. I think that's enough said, because there's so much stuff going on. Like, what do you think? What's happening in Chad, for example, right? You know what I mean? We don't even talk about the stuff, the crazy insanity that went on in South Africa about, I don't know, 3 months ago, or maybe it was 3 or 4 months ago. People don't hardly talk about Venezuela. Just name a city and then forget about this. Like I say, there's 190 some plus countries. What are even the names of some of these places? I get, if I sat down, I just may be able to write 100 countries down. That's pushing it. And it'd be pretty easy to come up with the first 50. But I may be able to write 100, sit at a table and come up with the names of 100 countries. I'm guessing. I don't even know for sure. But I'll tell you that last 95 or 92, whatever the hell it is. And I challenge anybody out there, unless you're a savant, someone who has total recall. Some people do. I don't have a photographic memory like that. Who knows what's going on in those other 90 countries? Do you ever hear about them? No. Who even knows what their names are? Unless you pull out some kind of, atlas or globe or something like that. But I mean, particularly when you're talking Southeast Asia, countries in Africa and South America, there are like little mini wars, civil wars, and like things going on that are beyond belief. But then again, flash back to the U.S. and saying 40 million people died maybe unnecessarily. We're dying from heart diseases, and people are dying of type 2 diabetes because it's like I had my cereal this morning. I'm trying to eat a healthy diet because I'm trying to stave off this. I don't want a gallbladder operation, and I've got problems there. And I'm trying to have a high fiber, low fat, low sugar diet, but at the same time make sure I get all the vitamins and minerals I need to maintain this face, this body that is somewhat timeless, right? And I've been able to do that because of healthy eating and doing, and growing my own food partially, but also eating healthy. And, and I do that. And, things like there's certain things I've figured out using myself as the guinea pig. And I've gotten confirmation on those things. Things like kale. I grow kale and I eat kale. Right? But, I was watching a guy yesterday, a guy who did a heart doctor. He's got a couple books out. Forget the guy's name. But he's performed over 10,000 open heart surgeries. He's one of the leading surgeries. You might know who the guy is if you. So this is like a serious surgeon, medical doctor who ended up, after having over 10,000 open heart surgeries, doing that. All right. So he knows the human body and can see what is it, and how to revisit his patients. And, when you're dealing with heart patients who are pre-op and post-op, you're talking nutrition and stuff too, what to eat, not to eat, and stuff like that. This guy knows his stuff. Well, he retired from that, all right, after doing 10,000. I mean, 10,000 operations. I'd like a guy to fix my brakes who fixed 10,000 brakes on the car, right? Do you know what I'm saying? This guy knows his stuff, all right? He's been in the trenches. And so he's moved into more or less into nutrition now. So clearly he's an MD. He's a medical doctor. And experienced with seeing directly the effects of food, diet on people, particularly on the heart. But, he's had patients, had a practice, and still has a practice. But what he does in his practice now is he's more into talking about about longevity, in other words, how you can be healthy, live longer, and live healthy, which is, I think, what everybody wants. Forget about transhumanism and hooking up to a machine. The power goes out. Forget that. That's for another show. But he was saying things like, for example, tomatoes are good because they have lycopene in them, which I knew that. But he goes, he never eats a tomato unless he peels the skin and gets rid of the seeds, because they have this lectin or some kind of thing like that. I forget what it is. I was watching this right before I went to bed last night. But I watched about an hour of him. He was in an interview. And and then he started talking about beans not being good for you, and grains. Now that was the big one. And he was trying to get a point across, saying that the human body is a collection of bacteria and viruses that basically make us, are more or less giving us our commands on what we eat and how we live our lives. You grasp that? In other words, we're a collection of cells, but those cells, it's like your gut. Everybody knows that, because that's the big thing now, and it has been for the past maybe even 15, 20 years, where the biome, people have talked about your gut and a healthy gut. And he's into that thing. And he was talking about that and how we're certain things that the certain bacteria, certain gut viruses, the stuff that's inside of us that digests things and releases things, feeds on things, removes things, how the body absorbs certain vitamins, minerals and things of that nature. That's really up to your microbiome and all these bacteria and things that are inside of you. And that we don't pay attention to that, and that there are certain things that are bad and that eat through the linings, like the skins and the seeds on the tomato, or like beans, unless you really cook them long. That's why, cultures that eat beans, do things like make chili, where they cook and you wonder why. You wonder why, like you'll see in Italy, they'll make a sauce and like a gravy, but they'll cook it long for hours, right? If they have the tomatoes made from fresh tomatoes or something like that. And they may well peel the tomatoes too. But you'll see in south of the border cultures where they'll make chili and things like that, and or bean dishes, and they'll cook it all day. Or people who have rice and beans and stuff like that, they'll use pressure cookers. In other words, the idea is they'll cook these toxins to the point where they're not toxic to the body. And so people say, well, I don't know what you're talking about, the Mediterranean diet, or these people that eat this rice and beans, they seem to live longer. Yeah, they do, but did you really look and see how they prepare their food? They don't just buy a GMO can off the grocery store shelf, right? Put it in a pot, and that's it, They have a process. But it's fascinating about this whole biome, and I'm just, I've been conscious of it. I've been eating these I found out that, like, he was he was talking about like yogurt, for example. And I've gotten off the yogurt thing a while back. Like I said, I just saw him last night. I found that there's a probiotic prunes you can get that have 10 times the absorption rate into your microbiome than yogurt, than non-fat or, regular or plain. Like a lot of people say, well, I only eat plain yogurt. No. And a lot of people don't know that. And, unfortunately, everything that's healthy like that, this is just a quick aside, they cost like close to $5 for a little bag of like semi-dried prunes, It's like they have that stuff for, out there, but it's like, in order to live well, be healthy, it costs money. And that's that whole thing with these cereals. Now, this grain thing I'm really confused on, because it's hard to get fiber. I did it today because I still have a little bit left. I figure, well, I've been doing it this long, but I may go shopping today or put in an order. Sometimes I get an order delivered to me. And I'm going to try to find, I was eating old-fashioned oats whole grain oats, Quaker oats type of thing. I was getting these like whole grain oats, like Cheerios type of thing that was, no non-GMO, gluten-free, nothing, no additives, right? Or whatever. And so everything I was buying, and they were all high in fiber. And I'm thinking, okay, great, whole grains, that's the thing, there's nothing worse than white bread or flour. Well, it's true, flour's bad for you, and raw sugars and icings and all that stuff, sweets and treats and candy and ice cream is bad for you. It is. All right, some people can get away with eating that stuff, but, if you've got some problems here and there, you can't touch this stuff. It's just going to, it's. And so you learn to live without it. Hey, I used to enjoy smoking cigarettes, to be honest with you. When I smoked, I enjoyed smoking. I wasn't like some of these people, just like they were smoking because they're nervous or just like, randomly smoking. It's like I just enjoy smoking a cigarette, sit down and, But I quit. I quit like 20 years ago. And I never looked back, and I don't really miss it. And it's the same with like ice cream and stuff like that, and sodas. I used to drink a couple of sodas every morning instead of coffee or anything like that. I even quit coffee. I'm just drinking it because it's supposedly good for your gallbladder or something. But there's other people out there that say coffee no. And now this guy's grains. That one I don't know about. But anyway, out of that thing. So I feel somehow, that. So I look back of this photo, which is interesting. I'm still wondering how I took that picture. Computer's in front of me. So this must have been from my video camera. This would have been, I was doing real audio, real video back then. We had our own server, a couple of us. And so this would have been from I guess a still from my video camera during my show 25 some years ago. Right. But I look back at that, not only was it a good time, and I wish I had that studio again, because it was in a much different place. I was just in an apartment I rented. I'm in my own house now. But the world and everything, it was like another time and place in the 90s. I mean, it was. And the world's gone completely mad. And I'm tired of people trying to they talk about it. That's the thing. The one thing I can't stand are pundits on YouTube and everywhere else. I don't watch the media, obviously. It's no interest. But it's like one criticizing the other, and then it's talking, and then a commercial break. They're not offering solutions. They don't have any, problems. And then you have the politicians the same way. Right? Save America, Build Back Better, Great Reset. I watched a woman the other day explaining how this guaranteed income idea, sounds good, and she went through it, but then got to the end of it and explained how it just wouldn't work. And then there's other people talking right now, which is hard for a lot of people to wrap their head around it. With the population growing and approaching 8 billion, all indications are that once it hits there, as it's going up, it's going to just crash, because not enough young people are having kids, and the older population is dying off. And so we're at a point right now where you're still seeing population growth, but that in the next decade or two, you're going to see population decrease, China has already implemented policies where they're encouraging people to have we're on that one child thing for a while. Everybody was talking about overpopulation. There's going to be 10 billion people. We won't be able to feed them. It's like now countries. That's why the U.S. has open borders. That's the one thing they don't talk. Everybody talks because they're all political. They want to get into some kind of thing about it. No, what they want is they want the bodies. They just want bodies in the country. They want people in here because they'll eventually be consumers one way or another. People may come in and it may be a free ride for a few years, but once assuming we don't self-destruct, I think we're headed for a Mad Max dystopian world within the next, I would say, 18 months. And I might shock some people, but when you look at how quick these opportunistic looters and these smash and grabbers can destroy a downtown district, well, just imagine if there was a grid down situation, even for a short period of time or anything else. We've got energy problems and shortages in this country. Sorry for taking a break, I just got to do that every now and then, How about this one?
So you found us.
What is it trying to tell us?
No strings, no catch. You own everything.
Now stay tuned to Rock Flux.
And yes, this is the ROCKFLUX channel on YouTube, and I'm also on Rumble, so if they take me off of this and I still feel like doing this, I'll be doing this from Rumble. But yeah, we're in a very precarious position right now. We have runaway inflation. That's not, it's like anything else. Once they raise a price, they never take it down. Like the Dollar Tree is now $1.25. And I said this before, that's 25% inflation, not 7% inflation. Right? I got a thing the other day from Ace. Because I go there and get my, soil and some things for my garden in the backyard. And the price of certain bags of soil that I'll, mixtures that I'll use in my raised beds and things like that have doubled since last year. So we're talking 100% inflation. The price of fuel's up by about a third, right? 33% inflation. Crude barrel is like $90 some dollars, and it was $60 some dollars just a couple of years ago, right? So, all of these things, and then crime, like I mentioned, I don't have to repeat that. Those numbers are they're unbelievable. Like, that's out of a sci-fi movie. And then the health issues are out of a sci-fi movie. We're unnecessarily, when you say 40 million people, maybe 50 million people since the year 2000, let's go add a couple, say the 21st century. So maybe in the 21st century, 50 million Americans died unnecessarily, which is another reason probably why we're having a population problem in general. But that's what I'm saying. They're letting people in over the border because they just need the bodies. They just need people. They don't care. See, you have to remember, I used to do this on my old shows, but I still have it here. To the powers that be, we're just cattle. And the real marionettes are the media and the politicians, like I always say. And then those who are caught up in the media and who worship the politicians into the cult of personality, they're like they're a puppet of the puppet. And of course, it's all hypocrisy for profit. Right? These people come up and, they claim to have moral standards, blah, blah, blah. But it's all pretense. Their actions don't follow through with the way they, the policies and their action and what actually happens. So I don't know. I don't mean to be like, some doomsayer, right? I'm not into this fear porn or whatever they call it. That's not my thing. You know, watch my shows. I have shows about peace and love and happiness, harmony, solutions to problems, what you can do with this and technology. I mean, last year I had 365 shows. This year I've probably already had, I don't know, well over 40 some. So we're talking like 400 shows just in the past, you know, since the beginning, since 2021. And I was doing shows in 2020. And, well, I've been doing shows since I showed you, you know, this picture. You know, how many shows have I really done? See, a lot of those shows were on Real Audio, so they're not even on YouTube. YouTube wasn't around then. We had our own server. They were coming from my website. Yet I was getting anywhere from lows of 20,000 listeners to upwards of 100,000, you know, at some point. So we were getting 1 million, you know, like with you, what happened on YouTube. Obviously, they looked at people like us. There weren't that many people out doing this kind of thing. There was me. There was, you know, the guy Alex, who was banned from everything. There was, you know, Art Bell, and there were some specialty people, some, you know, doing some things, but that was it. So it's very weird, you know, when you think about it. Hi, Trey. How you doing, man? If that's you. I'm not looking at the chat. I just did a moment ago. So anyway, but this whole matter of, like I said, I'm not a doomsayer. You know, personally, I'm like anybody else. I just want to have fun. But when you put everything together, when you think about that, and you say, okay, you know, and you put that in perspective with this like Ukraine obsession with the news media, who just, remember, all they're worried about is selling commercials. They just want you tuned in. CNN a couple of weeks ago was on the verge of collapse. Their ratings had dropped. They lost their airport contract, right, which was like their main viewership. And some of their shows were getting 100,000 views. Like I say, I was getting 100,000 views 25 years ago. On the internet, before YouTube, all right? People just, you know, finding me. And, you know, and when I was doing expedition coverage and stuff. So between my shows and some of the other stuff, you know, I was sometimes talking to 1 million. They used to call them uniques back in those days. See, it wasn't just clicks, and there were clicks. You had a banner ad at the top of your thing. That was a click. You know, you had, you know, views, but the key was unique views, unique viewers. And I could remember particularly one spring, I can't remember what year it was, but there were several months running where my stats, my unique viewer stats, were over 1 million a month. Were over 1 million. And that was before YouTube ever was in, you know, there was YouTube, before YouTube. So you imagine that. So I wasn't even on some central, you know, some place where people could go and subscribe, right? This was prior to YouTube. We're using Real Audio, Real Media. At that point, you know, we would go into video, mostly audio shows. You know, I played some of those things. I still have them here. You know, like here's one.
Tony Caravan with you. The Fireside Chat. Hey, thanks for tuning in this week.
That's like I was able to transfer some of those old shows from Real Audio. And, you know, I still have them. That's like a 20-year-old thing. And at that time, I was still smoking. I was doing the show, like Art Bell, sitting there smoking a cigarette, talking into the microphone. And they were like this, So I've been at this game for a long time, man. And one thing you learn about doing this, and especially back then when you're dealing with like high volumes of listeners and viewers, and doing so many shows, thousands of shows, that the research and what happens is that you hear it all. You see more than, it's like that line from Blade Runner. If you could see what I've seen with these eyes, that Rutger Hauer line right before he dies on the rooftop. It's a classic thing. And it's like, that's the way I that's how I feel sometimes, being from another place and another time. Because certainly whatever this is right now, this is not, this is not real, man. It's unreal. And the way people are acting is just not rational. It's not, it's not reasonable. It's not logical. It's irrational. I mean, what else can you say? I mean, I can jokingly play these things. This is insane. But, that doesn't really, just doesn't cut it. So if you think about that, think about how many homicides there are. 50 million people died unnecessarily from health reasons in the 21st century so far. Probably treatable, preventable, or curable, depending, This is CDC numbers. If you take them all in the aggregate, look at their annual leading causes of death, right? A couple million a year. We're not talking about this pandemic or any of that nonsense. All right? We're talking about just things. And then, yet the FDA approves all these foods that have all these things in them that these doctors and nutritionists, and like the doctor I was talking about, a guy who's done 10,000 open heart surgeries, 10,000. And basically he's saying, half of these things could have been prevented through diet, through what they were eating. 10,000, operations this guy's performed, 10,000 patients he saw. And heart disease is the leading cause of death in the U.S. right now. 650,000 or something like that a year. Right? Cancer's over like around 600,000 people a year die of cancer. All right? And things like prostate cancer that have just exploded. Right? You never even heard about a lot of people getting that. Now everybody knows somebody with it. I had it. I had a radical prostatectomy. I had prostate cancer. And then you hear these doctors talking and they're saying, there are all these things that are good for your prostate. If you eat this or don't eat that or blah, blah, blah. But see, we're not told that. We're told to basically wash our hands and social distance and wear a mask. We're not told to, peel the skin off a tomato. Don't eat this, right? Avoid so many grams of, avoid raw sugar and avoid so many grams of added sugars in your foods. And, we're not told that. And we're not told, and we're not given the opportunity to create diets that are tasty and we enjoy. See, nobody wants something to be boring, right? And so and I've had to do this on my own, and I have found ways of making meals that are not only healthy, but taste ridiculously well. But I'm still getting information and feedback from certain, the more I explore, because this is a never-ending story, it almost seems, where somebody's coming out and saying, well, watch out for whole grains. And I'm going, what? Grains? I thought whole grains is what you're supposed to be eating. And, it's like one of these episodes where I said, if you take a blade of grass in your yard, when it gets to the point, or if you ever watch, there's a show I watch. This is a quick aside. I got caught into this because, like I said, YouTube sucks so much. I'm so tired of hearing pundits talk about, Ukraine or something like that. Like I said, there's like a lot more people dying in the U.S. and in countries that you don't even know the names of than Ukraine. And Putin is not going to take over Europe. It's a defensive move on his part. Believe it or not, NATO has made not hidden the fact that they want to bring Ukraine into NATO, and the EU wanted Ukraine into the EU. And if you know the map of Ukraine, which I had put on, Ukraine bulges right into Russia, which would basically put NATO missiles in the heart of Russia. With in other words, it bulges in, so from three sides, north, east, and south. And so what Putin did was a defensive move, and people don't understand that. Oh, and I'm a communist for saying that or something like that, right?
I can no longer sit back and allow communist infiltration, communist indoctrination, communist subversion, and the international communist conspiracy.
Well, let me tell you something. First of all, Putin's not a communist. It's China that are the communists. And they seem to be able to have a free ride on there and do whatever the hell they want to. So that's a story about Ukraine. All right? Like them or not, dictator or not, people dying from missiles or not, it still is no comparison about the amount of people that people are dying in the U.S. from the FDA, allowing allowing these poisons to be given to everyone from infants to senior citizens, and who may well be responsible for the deaths of 50 million people in the 21st century, just in the past couple of decades. And and homicides, likewise, 100,000 homicides a year, right? It's ridiculous. So that's like another couple million people died in the U.S., killed, knifed, stabbed, murdered, and unsolved. And that's just there. That's just here. Then we got runaway inflation. And then we have smash and grab looters and opportunistic looters, rioters, right? A grid that's on the verge of collapse that's impossible to fix in time. See, in other words, you have to understand it this way. The size of the country. You have to be somebody who's driven across this country several times, crisscrossed it like I did, north, south, east, west, multiple times, and who's wasn't some tourist driving along Interstate 80 or 40 or 81 or 90 or, 76. In other words, you have to be somebody who's got off the beaten path and decided, hey, I think I'm going to pull off in Kansas and check this place out. Or pull into this road, this little motel next to this roadhouse somewhere down in Texas or something. And see and look at the telephone poles, how the power comes in, what the grid looks like in most of America, right? I'm not talking about in the elite areas, See, that's the thing. So what happens is it's just a recipe for disaster. It's falling apart already. The wind blows and the power goes out for a couple of hours. A woman hits a telephone pole because she's texting and driving or using her cell phone. And if there happens to be some transformer on there or it's connected to some transformer thing, the power could be out overnight. Because we react, we're not a proactive society. And they just don't happen to have that thing on hand in that particular locale. And they've got to have it come in from another state. They might not even have the technical expertise to put it in, so they got to drag in some guy from somewhere else who's able to hook that thing up. And wherein less and less people are qualified to do this kind of stuff. So you can't build back better or save America because, and it's useless to give people an income, right? A guaranteed income, because the fact of the matter is we're not going to make it that long. Because if there's a major grid down situation, which I'm predicting is going to happen, these looters are going to go crazy because they're going to be, I'm starving. And they're just going to loot the grocery stores. And then they'll do like they did in South Africa, loot the distribution centers. They'll move to the suburbs. They'll move wherever they can. I mean, I'm electrifying my fence, and I've got spikes on the back of my fence by my garden because I could imagine these people trying to jump over my frickin' thing if they see food in my garden and there's no food on the shelves in the stores. You know? I've got motion detector lights, sirens, all kinds of crap. But I'm also using nature, too, like plants. There are plants that sting people. And I'm planting them all around my peripheral, and they grow like weeds. You know. But anyway, that doesn't matter, you know? And then if that happens, I'll just grow inside. I'm successful. I've already told you, as I said, I've eaten my own kale grown in my own house, indoors. Right? One of the healthiest foods there are. Radishes I've grown. Herbs. You can do it. And if everybody would, I keep that great solar thing I started putting up there. If people would just have a little portable power pack and just a foldable set of solar panels, or just buy one or two solar panels. See, the thing is, when shit hits the fan, right? Might as well just be blunt about it. There's certain things are going to change, and that's it. The first thing's going to change is there'll be no internet, no apps, no texting, and none of that. People aren't going to know what the fuck to do about that. I've been looking at a lot of people, I have a shortwave radio, and there have been some breakthroughs in some, it's like kind of walkie-talkie technology. But there's this new one, I saw a review on it. I was watching a guy review it. A high wattage, it's like kind of a walkie-talkie. It's not like a CB, in that sense, but I can't think of the name of the thing. I'm sorry. Maybe I will, and I'll have eventually somewhere along this year, hopefully before things go down. But anyway, where most of them were like 25 watts tops or something like this, or whatever it was, this is like 250 watts or something. But it had the ability to work with repeater stations, repeater antennas, and stuff like that. But that the mileage on this thing was incredible. I mean, you literally, and the idea is to be able to get into that So you want to have a receiver. Like if you're interested in communicating with somebody like that, because you never know who you're talking to otherwise, right? I think we've seen enough sci-fi movies about that. You don't necessarily want to get on the radio and tell somebody where you are, right? Or go necessarily meet up with somebody, But, for family, relatives, friends, or something like that, you might want to have a predetermined, channel and an ability to make contact with them. And you know what the funny thing about this is? Because I was in the shortwave before, before when the internet was around, because I was in the internet 35 years ago, because I had the, original, with a 300 baud modem, I was doing, email through, to Australia and stuff. But I was in the short radio around that time also, and it may be even before that when I was a kid, because I worked in a radio station when I was a senior in high school. And then later on in life, I went to, the computer expos in Las Vegas when I used to live out in LA. And I was a general manager of a radio station, so I used to go, and I was looking at new technologies, and they're using it now, but it took years for it to come up. You see it in your cars, because the name of the song, people today, they just assume, right, that a radio station, you could tune to a radio station and it's going to tell you what the song is or something like that. And I'm not talking about people using their smartphone attached to their car, or even having that, or Sirius satellite or something, Sirius XM or anything. I'm talking about the idea of sidebanding. And shortwave has the ability, it's really crude, whatever, but you can get text across these mediums. And I just think that if people were smart, I'm going to look into it, to getting some of this newer stuff that's coming. And of course, the Chinese are the ones creating this stuff, and the things are cheap. They're only I think this one device costs like $100 some. Now, currently, to do that kind of thing, you would need a license, an FCC license. But remember, like I say, when the fit hits the shan, everything that, all bets are off. There's no rules or regulations anymore. Okay. In a grid down situation, there's you don't need an FCC license to talk to somebody on a ham radio, basically. But you have to also remember your Bitcoin's going to be worthless because you can't access it, and your bank account and your ATM card's useless. But our grid is in such bad shape that there's no building back better or saving America. It's falling apart. And solar and the windmills are already falling down, right? Half of them, right? They're, in other words, they've been up long enough. See, their life expectancy at best would be 20 years. That's like when they say, okay, well, this roof is good for 20 years. Yeah, well, I'll tell you, the part of my roof that's leaking had another 5 years, it was about 15 years into its 20-year thing. Unfortunately, I wasn't the guy. I don't know who the roofer was. I bought this house, from a guy who put that on. And so I don't have any claim, on warranty or even know who the hell did it. No, you don't, you rarely do you get the full, what they promise, especially those long-term promises. Well, anyway, I've seen from traveling, and I've seen from people who've taken videos. There's videos of everything now because everybody's got a freaking smartphone. So I've seen the burning windmills. I've seen the windmills blown over. The wind blows so fast that it blows the basically the propellers off of the fans. They've killed millions of birds, destroyed distorted migratory patterns, ruined landscapes forever. and they're not an answer to anything. And the same with solar panels. And the fact is, remember, the incentives that were put out under the Obama administration, okay, which, goes back a long time now, all right? That's a decade ago. So we're already into, the decay part. And so what's going to happen? So I'm saying at best, within the next 18 months in the coming years, beyond that, if we're lucky, fortunate, we're going to see all this stuff decaying. And meanwhile, they're saying you can't finish that pipeline, you can't drill on this land, and you can't use coal, and you can't use this, and you can't use that. But they don't understand that an electric car runs on natural gas and coal. And they don't understand that most of our appliances are Energy Star appliances. I know I sound like a broken record, but it needs to be said. There's always a new listener here or there that hadn't heard this thing. In other words, the U.S. is energy efficient. We have mostly energy efficient appliances compared to what other countries do, and even what we had 20, 25 years ago. We were using cathode ray tubes for our computers. All right? Like I said, I still have a G5 computer that's not even 15 years old, and that's using 200 watts. While the computer I'm using here to broadcast with, my main computer, is lucky if it's sucking in 25 watts. All right? We are very energy efficient. We are also have, from whether it's HVAC systems or whether it's factories, or whether it's plants that are operating, and we are capping, sequestering, filtering, our emissions, okay? To the point of where it's, raised the price of things. However, all that said, the point of the matter is right now, that stuff is not being told to the public, and they're just destroying this. So look how cold this winter is. All right. What are we going to do? All right. The whole northern tier of the U.S. We're back in the normal cycle, right? First, there was the pause. Remember, they called it global warming. It was Al Gore, and it was like, the world was going to end by 2010. All right. And then suddenly there was this thing, they called it the Great Pause, because they didn't figure out, all these disasters didn't happen. And then they figured, they met, and then they got emails were exposed from the UN IPCC. And then we found out, then they decided we better change it from global warming to climate change, because it doesn't look like it's really going to warm. And the way it was warming was, they were taking readings at airports with tarmacs and jet engines that were naturally a degree Celsius or 2 higher, and from cities, which actually were always a degree Celsius or so higher because of the concentration. And they were using satellites that were taking surface temperatures of the water. And the surface temperature of the water is always hotter. You go down just a foot or two, and it's like, ice cold. So they lied, because that was their original plan to get one of their original plots to get people and get this great reset rolling. It was like phase 1, step 1. But that has nothing to do with anything. The problem is what it ushered in was it made the use of gas and so-called fossil fuels. I call them organic fuels. There's nothing more organic than crude oil. It comes from the ground. It's basically vegetables. You know what I mean? It's organic. And the way we control our emissions. I was hearing the governor of Alaska talk about what they do up there. And sometimes you see at refineries, you see these things, they call it flame out or flame something or other, that releases this into, and those gases go into the air. Well, they don't do that in Alaska. They basically kind of they ban that, and they, So in other words, people haven't been kept up with the way they've caused. Like in this show, you'll see trucks, not today necessarily, but I have that camera 2 view outside up at the top of my screen. And all these trucks are going to feed. There's 2 coal electric plants here, like not far from here. I don't know, 20 miles, 15 miles, maybe not even that much. All right. And all these coal trucks go up like from 5 to 6 a.m. It's like a road rally. I always point it out. That's why I put a camera out there. Well, the thing is, one of those plants was recently just reopened. The other one had already gone repairs. But because the reason it was closed for like 3 or 4 years, because they had to refit it and retool it for emission standards so that it wasn't releasing, polluting the air. And that story, never got, you think that would be like an interest story on a newscast. See, that they would dare cover that. Some pretty girl, blonde, made up in front of this power plant that's with coal trucks pulling in, saying, I'm standing next to such and such plant that just reopened after having been closed for 3 years while they installed this incredible system to sequester this and filter any kind of dangerous emissions into the atmosphere. This is basically what they call clean coal. And then have the guy from somebody come over. Could you please explain that to us? What exactly did you do and how? Yeah, you're not going to see a story like that. But that's how it is. And we've done that all over this country. Right? I saw the governor of Wyoming, I think, was also talking similarly about the steps they took. Right? And Pennsylvania, which is a coal state, which still has some coal plants like this, on the eastern part, the anthracite part of the state where I grew up as originally, coal, the coal region, you can't get coal there. Like if you have your coal we had a coal furnace in my house when I grew up. I used to shovel coal into this little coal bin and then take out the ashes once a week. Imagine that. Take these ash buckets out. And in the wintertime, I'd be have to carry like 4 or 5 of those things out. But, there's some people that still have some coal furnaces and stuff, but they can't get the coal because they're shipping all that stuff over to India and China and stuff, where they get more, they have more money than to sell it domestically or locally. But there's so much of this stuff that people aren't aware of that what I'm saying, and I use that word, in the aggregate. So let's take into consideration the fact that people can't cook, they can't take care of themselves, they've been brought up in a nanny state. All right, there are opportunistic looters and smash and grabbers, arsonists, rioters. That the first sign of weakness in some city or some something they disagree with or that the media blows out of proportion, that they're out there smashing and destroying areas. Now you compound that to food shortages, supply shortages, or worse, a grid down situation. All right? And see, it doesn't have to last long. See, here's the problem. I predict that if the grid went down for even 2 weeks, all right, it would be too late. It'd be too late. Like maybe 2.5 weeks would be is all it would take. Think about this. Nobody could access the grid's down for 2.5 weeks. All the Bitcoin millionaires are screwed, right? So they're somehow trying to get over to a foreign country that has a grid, all right? So they get their money, all right? So they're moving, and they'd be right to stay over there, Okay, this is 2.5 week. Remember there used to be a show on the History Channel, used to be called like Life After People or something like that. Do you remember ever see that show? I remember seeing an episode or two of it. Okay, I'm talking about Life After, grid down, just because we have this grid that's in tatters and it's falling apart, okay? And that these windmills and all these other things, they're falling apart too. They're like too old already, and nobody wants to lay claim to them. There's no chain of custody, they call it, because they ended up being sold on Wall Street and stuff like that, bought and sold as commodities and stuff. So they're falling apart. They're going to be done within, we have runaway inflation. We have a culture that just can't cook, can't take care of themselves, was raised by the nanny state, all right? It's a recipe for a Mad Max disaster, dystopian society. And here's how it's going to play out. The grid goes down because it's fallen apart. Forget about building back better, because you can't build this entire nation. It's big. You have to have driven across it by yourself or with a friend in a car multiple times, north, south, east, and west, and seen that there's still major tracks of just high-tension wires, and in some cases telephone poles that used to be telegraph poles almost. Okay? This is the system. The sewer pipes, they've been digging up my street, digging and digging and digging 3 times. They can't fix it. The sewage lines, some of them are 100 years old. There are gas lines in major cities that go back to the gaslight days, when people like turned on the light in their house with gas lights. And then they've used that same for their gas appliances, and restaurants are using it for their, in their kitchens. Those gas lines under there, some of them are 100 years old. Well, anyway, this grid is falling apart, and we're in reaction mode. We're not proactive. We haven't been proactive. See, we should have been proactive in the 80s. All right, 40 years ago. Now we're reactive. We can't even keep up with it. It's like the 12,000 bridges that are falling down. It's like we can't fix 12,000 bridges. We don't have the construction personnel, the construction companies, the big firms to do it. And we don't have individuals with that kind of specialized training. We can't put crews out there with foremen to do this stuff. We just don't have those people with those tradesmen anymore. All right, that's long gone. And it's just like linemen to fix, the grid and stuff. We can't handle it. So there might be sporadic certain areas that would have power, other areas wouldn't. But if the grid was down for, say, 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, which isn't really much, but in the first day, people would be like, I can't use my smartphone's not working. Hey, the lights are out. Everything in the refrigerator. What are we going to do? Right? So they're going to eat whatever they got before it spoils. After 3 days, everything starts more or less spoiling, except for the smart people who figure out stuff. I've got all kinds of ideas on that. In my book, Then What, I think I give some tips on that. And I've done it on this show, and I'll do it again, but not today. It's getting later. But the point is, after the 3rd day, they're going to start looting the grocery stores and any place they can where they can get food. Right? And then and anybody who looks like fair prey, they'll be breaking into people's houses. Who are they? The masses. Right? This is, the masses. People who can't cope. The same people you see out in the streets, the opportunistic looters, the smash and grabbers, right? And other people who are just going to follow along. And so they're going to destroy all these convenience stores, all of these restaurants, all of these places are just going to be looted and smashed and grabbed. And after a week or so, that's done. So now they'll move out of the cities into the suburbs like they did in South Africa about 3 or 4 months ago. It didn't get coverage, but it happened. It happened. And it happened there. It'll happen here. Okay, so now we're just into about a week and they're already in the suburbs and everything's out of control. People are freaking out. Their whole life was based on their cell phone. They don't have any access to their ATM card, right? What are they going to do? Right? And so who know, you know what I mean? You're talking that's week 1. By week 2, it's just, it's like, that, National Guard type of stuff will be pulled out and doing this kind of thing, not the other. But at that point, it's already too late. And that's assuming that, that might have just been, caused by just what they called the Carrington event, a simple solar activity, like that CME that took out the 40 satellites, Elon Musk's SpaceX satellites, the Link satellites, whatever his internet service is called. They're in low orbit, and we have a weakened magnetic field. A lot of people don't understand that the Earth is very susceptible right now, more so than ever before, because our magnetic field is very weak. They don't report that. That's like one of the things that's affecting some of these things that they're trying to attribute to climate change is because of Earth changes that are cyclical changes and basically revolving around the sun and its grand cycles. I mean, these are realities. So when you take into consideration an infrastructure that's falling apart, that's impossible, it would take decades and decades if you had a proactive approach. Instead, the news media is focusing on Ukraine, right? Ukraine. All right? While 50 million people died in America, all right, because of the FDA approved, because we're not eating right, basically, and our doctors and big pharma and big ag is screwing us over. And what did I say? A couple million other people died from murder because crime's out of control in this country. And those murders, half of them, more than half of them went unsolved. And, and then, like I say, whatever's going on everywhere else in the world. And everything, it's Ukraine, Putin, Biden, Trump, Russia. Who gives a shit? People wake up. You don't realize we're on the verge of like a major collapse. Not to mention the stock markets can't keep this up indefinitely. We got, when you have inflation, like I'm trying to say, when the cost of frickin', going to a store to buy soil is twice the price, when the dollar store is now $1.25, that's 25% inflation. When the price of meat is out of control, when you go to the grocery store and a 39-cent tiny little can of tomato paste is now 69 cents. You see what I mean? That's 40% inflation. The price of gas has gone up, well over $1, right? So what happened? So you got that going on at the same time, and you've got, people are just going to go crazy because they're nuts to begin with. It's a world gone mad, but it's a country gone mad. Dan, this country's mad, and people are addicted to the internet. What happens when they can't do this? The moment this goes out, I'm fine. That's why I've been buying books lately. I showed you the other day, I just bought a book by this Dr. Beth or whatever. So I not only write books, but I acquire books. So I've got a garden, I've got a lounge chair, I've got a place where I could sit out, listen to music. I've got my solar panel, I've got my power backup. All right? So I'll survive. And maybe I'll get, and I've got shortwave radios and, all that emergency stuff. So screw it. I'll live out my life. There goes the trucks. Feed that behemoth. Feed those electric cars. People who drive electric cars in this part of the country are driving cars that are being fueled by coal. Think about that. They don't know that. You know? It's never dawned on them. Right? And so they're like, they're probably the same type of person saying, we got to close down those coal places. And it's like, there's the only thing coming out of those smokestacks is steam. Steam. That's it. Like I always say, CO2 is 0.004% of the atmosphere. It's what grows plants, trees, right? Gives us food and which in turn give us food and oxygen. They're trace gases. My big sci-fi question is, who are the nitrogen breathers? 78% of the Earth's atmosphere is nitrogen. We live on a nitrogen planet. Think about that. So if you were some kind of creature, you know, some alien, for example, I know this is just a little woo-woo, but, you know, just to get into this. I find this fascinating. 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, and 0.9% argon. So 99.9% of the Earth's atmosphere is nitrogen, oxygen with a little bit of argon. And things like methane and CO2 and water vapor and stuff, those are trace gases. So not part of the 99.9% of our atmosphere. But the predominant gas by far, 78%, is nitrogen. So if you were a nitrogen breather, or it would make sense, think about this though. If you were, is there some life form on this planet that breathes nitrogen? That we're just simply not aware of them. I mean, it's bizarre. I mean, maybe maybe we just, you know, it's like we can't sense them. It's like somebody was saying, there's this one guy, I refer to him in my book, actually. In my book, Codex, actually. This is my, let me get rid of this thing here, this title card. Another time in another place. David Chalmers is the guy who coined the name The Hard Problem of Consciousness. But he's not the guy I'm talking about. Let me see if I got this guy's name here. Well, anyway, I advise you to Codex. It's an interesting book. That's the one I wrote before this one. But anyway, there's this guy out there. He's got a book out too. Everybody's got a book. He's some college professor, researcher type of guy. Has a team researching this intensely right now. Yeah, the coffee was much better than yesterday, so I'm going to make it a little weaker. So his idea is that we only see, this isn't his main thing, but he's trying to say reality isn't reality, and a lot of people say that, you know. So what we perceive like shortcuts. I know this is like totally, but you know, this is in line with me trying to, you know, just mess with you.
The future. He came from the future.
But you know, then again, you know, like I said, I don't know. It's like the same guy to me. 27 years ago. I don't know. Maybe. You know?
The future. He came from the...
Well, anyway, sorry. So the idea is this. We develop, just like with our eyesight. You know we see in darkness in the very back of our skulls, which is pure black darkness. which is just a weird concept to think of, because we think of eyes, light, photons, and all that stuff, right? But, but the human body develops, senses have developed shortcuts of perception, the way we perceive reality and the way we deal and function. Everything's a shortcut. It's even like when we feel something or we go to perform an action, what we're doing is that the speed in which it takes in order to get that message out and back, there's predictive behavior involved in doing something, even with your hand, okay? Because the neural transmitters, in other words, it's not fast enough. So our brain basically kind of predicts a thing, right? If that makes sense. And I'm not going to get too much into that, but I'm just giving that an example. It's like almost everything we do, all right, is for efficiency. The human body has developed the bioelectric brain and this android-esque body, I call it, right? Talk to a surgeon, it's a freaking machine, man, with all these weird parts and all these things. And like I started this off with this microbiome and all that bacteria and stuff. We're a collection of bacteria, and they even affect our brain. Like they want, right? So if you have the wrong bacteria in your gut, it could tell you to get fine sugar, right? They do this sounds a little gross, but they do these transplants. This is weird. But they've taken given somebody a colonic, say, for example, and then put in the bacteria from somebody else's gut, basically feces, more or less, implanted it. And in one instance, somebody had some, I guess it was one of those inflammatory diseases or some kind of immune deficiency diseases or something like that. And it had to be a blood relative, and it was a blood relative. This is an actual case study, right? And what happened was they saw, by putting that new biome in there, okay, the person's autoimmune disease was cured. All right. I think it was something like an autoimmune disease. Don't quote me on that specific thing. It was a thing that affects you that way, kind of. But the person gained, within a short period of time, within a couple of months, gained 32 pounds. For no known reason. They weren't didn't get on a sugar kick, didn't get on any kind of weird thing or whatever, like blah, blah, blah. And so when the doctor looked at it, this weight gain, right? Because this was involved in a study. They found out that the cousin who donated the biome, right? Because this is something they do, right? You don't hear much about this, but yeah, I get into this. I get into weird science, I look into papers, journals. Well, they found out that cousin was about 30 pounds overweight that donated the basically the feces biome, the whole gut bacteria, okay? Isn't that weird? And so once that bacteria, got into this new person, it cured them of this thing because that other person wasn't suffering from that and had a different, microbiome, so to speak. But that person was 30 pounds overweight, and this person became 30 pounds overweight. And there were other studies done where similar weird things happened like that, and showing that it's your biome that is controlling your, you, right? So yeah, it could be the bacteria, that is the major life form. Well, is the major life form on the planet. So the aliens are the bacteria. And we are a collection of bacteria and viruses, right, put together, and they're influencing the way we live and what we consume. And that's why and at the same time, that's why certain, like we're eating the wrong foods. because some plants don't want to be eaten. Again, to get back to this perception thing, and I don't want to run long on this show, I try to do this fast. The reason we perceive fruit like colors like red, right, yellow, orange, because those are ripening fruits, and the plant wants us to consume that fruit when it's ripe, because at that point the seed has solidified and hardened enough, okay, that it's either not going to be eaten, or like in the case of like smaller fruits and stuff, like with birds and stuff, it's going to go through their system and it's going to be planted somewhere, and and the cycle of life of that plant continues. But there are other plants that just simply don't want to be eaten, all right, at all. And so they have toxins in them. And there's a lot of those plants that we are consuming, and we're not aware of that. Isn't that weird? But anyway, back to this weird thing. So we've developed, evolved efficiently enough that we see what we want to see, hear what we want to hear, touch what we want to touch, and that we're not necessarily perceiving the world completely the way we should be perceiving the world. So there may well be more than bacteria, 78% nitrogen, okay? I'm just posing this out there. This is like a head thing, something to think about. All right. That we just we're not seeing the world the way it really is. And that's why people who go on hallucinogens and all different kinds of trips and stuff like that, they see all this stuff, or like they've heightened aware of perception, people talk about this, that, the other, blah, blah, blah. And what it is it's closing down or opening up certain things that make us be able to get through life without being totally overwhelmed. In other words, if we saw everything that's out there to see, we couldn't function. You see, it would be overwhelming. It would be too much. So that's why, animals, so fruit eaters tend to see in color generally, because the plants want you to see the ripened fruit, which is usually these bright colors. Whereas something like a dog or something, it doesn't have a preference to be eating fresh fruit necessarily. I mean, we feed, animals, people give things to animals now, like I used to trying to tell somebody before, animals used to live a lot longer, but once the veterinarian industry came along, and once all this pet food industry, entire aisle dedicated to pet food and all this stuff, suddenly your dogs and cats are only living to be 12 years old, 13 years old, 15 years old. We had a cat was 23. My cousin's cat was like 20 some when I grew up as a kid. It was like you had cats and they lived to be like 20 something. Right? And you were feeding them like this weird thing, this weird can thing. Or my mom would, put out if we were eating spaghetti or something for dinner, she'd put out a plate of spaghetti for the cat, and that would be the cat's dinner. Leftover spaghetti and meatballs. And the darn thing lives to be 20 some years old. Do you understand? They used to eat the nature of a cat is to eat live mice and, rats and vermin and, and even the alley cats survive on rotted food in a dumpster. And people are worrying about refrigerating their cans of cat food. And I'm going, Anyway, so we just forget about the bacteria nitrogen aspect of it. That's a part of it. But we're talking 78% of the frickin' planet. So imagine it's another life form out there that we just simply can't perceive. All right? Just the same way as we can't perceive everything, because if we did, it would be overwhelming for we'd be unable to function in society, right? If we smelled everything that there was to smell, like the way a dog smells, right? Like what about an eagle? Like, for example, so I have hawks around where I live, and hawks eat little finches. They eat a couple of them a day. And I have birds in my yard. Now, they usually stay away because I'm around. But once or twice I've seen like one of these things fly into my yard. I thought it was a plane. You always see one of these, a wingspan of something that's like 12 or 14 feet come flying through your yard to swoop up and grab a little tiny house finch or something, right? But you see those things way up there in the sky, and they see me, and that's why they don't come down. I have a bird feeder in my backyard. But they can see. So how could that tiny little eyeball, on an eagle or a hawk see from such a great distance in such clarity, right? And how does a dog or a mouse, the tiny little nose on a rat or something, or even some insects that can detect things from like a mile away, right? I mean, I've got a pretty big snoz, okay? Well, how could this giant nose barely smell what's in the next room unless it was something, ridiculously intense? Yet some tiny insect, or small rodent detects something almost a mile away. It's the same with hearing, dogs hearing. Now, yeah, you could do this to your ear and make like a conical shape or something and you can hear better, right? I was going to make these things one time, like out of cardboard that you just fold over the top of your ears and call them dog ears, just for the joke of it. Sell them on the internet for like, a couple of bucks. Because they do improve your hearing. That's why you see those old timers in the old movies going, "Hey, what'd you say, hey?" But the fact is what you're doing is improving that, it's like the parabolic thing, on a satellite dish. But no, if we were able to smell things, if we had eyesight that was that intense and we had night vision and all that kind of stuff, and there are some people born that way, but, it's 1 in whatever, million or whatever. But I mean, if you had that ability, you would be overwhelmed. If I could smell something a mile away, I would interfere with my ability to function in life. If I could see colors and infrared and different things like that, I would have this society. I couldn't function in this society. It's the same with hearing. If I could sit here and suddenly I have a hearing, you see that, sometimes in movies, like somebody becomes a vampire or something and suddenly they can hear something, all these people talking or something. So in perception, it's the same way. We have shortcuts and efficient. In order to be efficient, we have all of these shortcuts across the board, not just with our senses, but the way our brain even processes and perceives reality. And it's something the average person doesn't think about. And so, I'm just posing from a sci-fi thing, just to end this thing. Just imagine on a nitrogen planet. This is a nitrogen planet. So 78% nitrogen. So maybe we're not, bacteria could be considered a primary life form. I always say, the fungi and the trees, because when you look from the sky, all you see is trees, forests, and oceans, of course. We're a water planet as well. But I'm saying, what if there's this other life form we're not even aware of that's outside of beyond bacteria? All right. Or if it is the fact that we are just a collection of bacteria and we don't get it. And like I started this show off saying, we need to focus more on our microbiome, and that could be the cure to everything. But instead they're saying, wash your hands, social distance, and wear a fucking mask. Instead of saying, eat this, don't eat that. It's that simple, and you can live, like this one guy was saying, you could live beyond what you could possibly even imagine. 120 years, easy. 160 years, not a problem. 250, most likely. And that's without transhumanism or putting your consciousness into a computer. It's just some crazy stuff to think about. And with all the madness going on in the world and all this other crazy shit, it's just to put things in perspective. So,
Good morning.
I'll talk to you tomorrow. Visit my site, rockflux.com. There's links there to all my crap. That new bucket hat has ROCKFLUX on it. I'm getting one of those. And if you need great solar stuff, man, get yourself some backup. The grid's going down one way or another, like I say. And there's my books and link. Everything's on ROCKFLUX. It's a crappy website. It's just basically a collection of links to these things. So check it out, and, I'll talk to you tomorrow. So, there's one thing I have to do before I end this, which I forgot to do. You can leave if you want to. I left the link on my website from yesterday, but I have to do this before this goes into the archives. Save. Anyway, take care, guys. I'll talk to you tomorrow.